The 36-year-old man was returning home after a 12-hour shift at the auto repair shop when he noticed the door to his apartment was slightly ajar. Inside, everything had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned, cabinets were emptied, and the floor was littered with shards of broken dishware. The wall safe hung open, its hinges violently torn out, but the worst discovery was in the bedroom. A wooden display case with his awards was gone from the wall. 3 combat medals, the patch of his Tier 1 unit, and a photograph of his squad set against the ruins of Aleppo. To the thieves, it was just junk metal. To Shane Miller, it was the only thing connecting him to a past he had spent the last 4 years trying to forget. Something inside him snapped that night. The man who had commanded assault operations in Syria, who was trained to hunt enemies in the rubble of cities, realized the police wouldn't help. The system wouldn't punish these street rats. He would have to do it himself. Those who had robbed the veteran didn't know who they had just challenged. The hunt had begun. My name is Shane S. Miller. I'm 36. For the last 4 years, I've worked as an auto mechanic at a small garage on the outskirts of Port Arthur, Texas, an industrial port city where the Gulf meets the refineries, oil terminals, and old working-class blocks. The city breathes through the port: freighters, container ships, tankers. The air constantly smells of salt, diesel, and fish. The population is around 270,000 people. Most work at the docks, the plants, or for logistics companies. The young people head off to Dallas or New York. Mostly, those who remain are accustomed to the sea, the wind, and the measured pace of provincial life. I arrived here 4 years ago. After my discharge from the military, I drifted for 6 months, hitting places like Miami and San Diego. I never stayed anywhere long. Too many people, too many questions, too much noise. I chose Port Arthur because nobody knew me here. A port city where people are used to not asking extra questions. Sailors come and go, truckers pass through in transit. Everyone is busy with their own thing. It was the perfect place to disappear. The shop where I work is called the Anchor Garage. The owner, 62-year-old Frank Bannon, a former Navy engineer, is a decent man with rough hands and a keen eye. He hired me without asking much. I came in and said I could fix cars, big rigs, and specialty equipment. He looked at my military bearing, at the scars on my hands, and nodded. "Show me what you got." I broke down and rebuilt the engine of an old utility truck in 3 hours. He told me, "You stay. I'll pay you weekly. I don't ask about the past, and you don't ask about mine." We shook hands. I've been here ever since. My job is simple: fix engines, change oil, run diagnostics, sometimes weld cracked truck frames. The clients are mostly long-haul truckers, dock workers, and fishermen. The trucks are old, aging models. Nothing modern, nothing with complex electronics. Just honest mechanics. Wrenches, hammers, welders. Work with my hands, work that doesn't require thinking. That's exactly what I needed. After the military, thinking was dangerous. Too many memories, too many faces of fallen comrades, too much blood. Working in the shop helped me not think. Come in at 7 a.m., fire up the welder, crawl under a truck, return home at 8 p.m., tired, dirty, and fall asleep without dreams. 4 years of this routine. 4 years of trying to forget. I live in an older area of Port Arthur called the South Side Flats. Panel housing from the 60s, narrow courtyards, playgrounds with rusted swings. My home is a 1-bedroom apartment on the first floor of a 2-entrance block. It's a combined kitchen and living room with a small bath. Nothing extra. I bought the furniture: a couch, a table, chairs, an old dresser, at a flea market. I don't watch TV or use the internet. My phone is the simplest flip phone, just for calls. I live like a monk. Work, home, rare trips to the grocery store. Neighbors greet me but don't socialize. To them, I'm just a quiet, solitary guy who works as a mechanic. No one knows who I was before. No one asks questions. That's how it is in port towns. Everyone has their own past, and no one gets involved in others' business. But the past doesn't let go. Every night, the same nightmares. Aleppo, 2016. The ruins of the city, the smell of burning flesh, the cries of the wounded, gunfire, explosions. I wake up at 3 a.m., soaked in sweat. My heart pounds, my hands reach for a non-existent weapon. I get up, walk out onto the balcony, stand barefoot on the cold concrete, smoke cheap cigarettes, and look at the port lights in the distance, the dark water, the rare street lights. The silence is broken only by a ship's horn and the wind howling between the buildings. I stand there until my body starts to go numb from the cold. The physical pain helps bring me back to reality. It reminds me that I'm here, that I'm alive, and that the war ended 4 years ago. I have no friends. Frank Bannon sometimes invites me for a drink after work, but I always refuse. My co-workers at the shop, 3 older men, all with their own families and concerns, we only talk about work. I haven't had a woman in my life since coming to Port Arthur. I tried once. I went on a date with a clerk from the corner store. She invited me to the movies. I agreed, but during the film, there was a loud, unexpected explosion scene. I instinctively grabbed her hand, pulled her down, covering her with my body. She panicked and screamed. People around us stared. I apologized, walked out of the theater, and never called her again. After that, I understood. I'm not ready for a normal life. Maybe I never will be. The only thing connecting me to the past, to that part of my life when I was something more than just a mechanic, hung on the bedroom wall. A wooden case under glass. Inside, 3 medals. A silver star, a bronze star for valor, and a Defense Department medal for service in the Syrian operation. Beside them, a Tier 1 unit patch with a wolf emblem. And a photograph. 8 men in camouflage, dirty, tired, weapons in hand, standing in front of a ruined building in Aleppo. My squad. 7 of them are dead. I'm the only one who survived. That photograph and those medals were the only proof that I had once served my country, that I had risked my life, that I had been part of something greater. Everything else from the past, I destroyed. I burned my documents, threw out my uniform, and cut all ties. But I couldn't throw away the medals. It would have been a betrayal of my fallen comrade's memory. Yesterday was an ordinary Thursday, November 15th. Autumn in Port Arthur is cold and windy. The temperature was 46 degrees. Rain fell from morning till night. I was at the shop since 7 o'clock a.m., replacing the transmission on an old heavy-duty truck. It was a dirty, heavy job. The 260-pound transmission requires a helper. Frank helped hold it. We finished around 6 p.m. My hands were covered in grease, my back ached, and my clothes were filthy. Frank said, "Good work, Shane. Go home, rest. Tomorrow, a new rig, another transmission." I nodded, washed my hands, changed, and walked home. It's a 20-minute walk from the shop. The rain got heavier. I walked down empty streets past closed stores, past the few people carrying umbrellas. The wind off the Gulf cut right through my jacket, and my old boots were soaked. But I didn't care. After Syria, after 122 degrees heat, sandstorms, and shellfire, American rain just felt like water. Nothing scary. I reached my building around 6:30 p.m., climbed the steps to the entrance, unlocked the code, and went inside. I went up to the first floor, took the keys from my pocket, and then I noticed it. The door was slightly open, maybe half an inch. The lock was intact, but the door wasn't fully closed. I froze. My hand instinctively went to my waist, where the holster for my pistol used to hang, but nothing was there. 4 years without a weapon. I'm a civilian, just a mechanic. I listened closely. Silence from inside the apartment. No sounds, no voices, no footsteps. I carefully pushed the door open with my foot. It opened silently. I stepped inside and flipped on the hallway light. The sight made my heart clench. The entry was trashed. The coat closet was open. Clothes were tossed onto the floor. Shoes were scattered. The wall mirror was shattered. I walked into the main room. It was worse there. The couch was overturned, the table moved, drawers pulled out, their contents dumped on the floor. Books, tools, old papers. Everything was mixed in a heap. But the worst part was in the bedroom. I stepped in and saw it immediately. The wall safe was breached. The metal door was ripped off, hanging by one hinge. It was empty inside. The cash was gone. It was $7,500, my savings from 6 months. The documents were gone too. Passport, discharge papers, driver's license. But the worst was the wall opposite the bed. The wooden case with the medals had hung there. Now it was gone. The wall was empty. Only the mounts remained, nails sticking out of the plaster. The case had been ripped off and taken, along with the medals, the unit patch, and the squad photograph. I stood there staring at the empty wall. A wave of cold fury rose inside me. Not because of the money or the documents, but because of the medals. That was the last link to my past, the final proof that I had served, that I was a soldier, that my comrades hadn't died in vain. And some street punks had stolen it. To them, it was just metal they could sell. To me, it was memory. It was blood. It was the lives of my friends. I slowly sank onto the bed. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. The cold, controlled rage that I was trained to suppress in special forces. A rage that doesn't scream or break things, but plans, waits, and acts. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Exhale. Again. My pulse slowed. My mind cleared. I had to think logically. Who could have done this? Common apartment thieves, local lowlifes, junkies who needed cash for a fix. They usually operate during the day when people are at work. They break in, grab what they can carry, and flee. Not professionals. Amateurs. I got up and inspected the apartment more closely, looking for clues. What did they leave? The front door lock wasn't broken, so they either picked it or tricked the mechanism. I looked at the door frame. There were fresh scratches around the keyhole. They worked roughly, rushing, definitely not professionals. I went into the main room. On the floor, among the scattered items, I found a cigarette butt. A cheap brand. The thieves smoked right here while robbing the place. Arrogant. Sure no one would come home. I picked up the butt with 2 fingers and smelled it. Tobacco mixed with something sweet. Maybe marijuana. Definitely local punks, junkies or petty criminals. I went into the kitchen. The fridge was open. Some food was eaten. A chunk of sausage was bitten off. Milk was drunk. Bread was broken apart. So they were hungry. They sat here for a while. They didn't just rush in and out. They settled in, ate, smoked, and calmly searched everything. The sheer nerve was unbelievable. There was dirty tableware in the sink, a plate, a knife, a fork. The thieves had eaten my food with my cutlery. On the rim of the plate, there was a fingerprint, faint but visible in the grease from the sausage. I carefully put the plate back. It might be useful if I went to the police. But should I? The police are useless in cases like this. They barely investigate apartment break-ins. They'll file a report, put it in a drawer, and forget it. The chance of finding the thieves is nearly zero. The chance of getting the medals back is even less. If the thieves had already sold the medals, they'd be sitting on the black market or with a fence. It would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. I returned to the room, sat on the overturned couch, and looked at the mess. An ordinary person would call the police, file a report, get a note for the insurance company, and accept the loss. But I am not an ordinary person. I am a former Tier 1 operator. I was trained to track enemies, plan operations, and act in conditions where a mistake costs lives. I was taught not to surrender, not to retreat, and to complete the mission at any cost. For 4 years, I tried to forget those skills, to bury them deep inside, to live as a normal civilian. But now, staring at the empty wall where my medals hung, I realized it's impossible to forget. A soldier remains a soldier forever. You can take off the uniform, but you can't take off what's inside. I took out my phone and called the police. The dispatcher answered in a bored voice. "Southside Precinct. Go ahead." I said, "I want to report a burglary. My apartment was broken into. Cash and personal items were stolen." The dispatcher sighed. "Address?" I gave the address. He took it down. "Stay put. An officer will be there within the hour." He hung up. I put the phone away and sat down to wait. An hour later, a patrol car arrived. 2 officers got out. The senior one, a lieutenant about 40, heavy-set, with a tired face. The junior one, a sergeant about 25, skinny, with an acne-scarred face. They came up to me, entered the apartment, and looked around. The lieutenant pulled out a notepad. "Tell me what happened." I gave him a brief account. Came home from work, door open, apartment trashed, safe broken into. Cash, documents, and medals stolen. The lieutenant was writing, nodding. When I finished, he asked, "How much cash was stolen?" $7,500, I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Keeping that much cash at home is unwise." I stayed silent. He continued. "What documents were stolen?" "Passport, discharge papers, driver's license." He wrote it down. "Anything else valuable?" I paused. Then I said, "Medals, combat awards, 3 of them. Also a Special Forces patch and a photograph." The lieutenant looked at me more closely. "Military. Where did you serve?" "Special Forces, Syria, 2016. He nodded respectfully. "Understood. That's a shame, but you realize medals are worth next to nothing on the black market. The thieves likely sold them already. It'll be very difficult to find them." I looked him in the eyes. "But you'll try?" He sighed. "We'll file a report. We'll question the neighbors, check for security cameras if there are any. But honestly, our clearance rate for apartment burglaries is maybe 10%. Most cases go unsolved for years. The thieves are usually junkies or local punks. They act fast, sell the stolen goods faster, and leave no traces." I asked quietly, "So, you won't do anything?" The lieutenant shook his head. "I didn't say that. We'll do everything we can, but I can't promise a result. Those are the realities." He handed me a form. "Write out a statement. Describe everything that was stolen in detail. We'll register it and start the investigation." I took the form and a pen, sat down at the kitchen table, and started writing. I described everything in detail. The time the theft was discovered, the list of stolen items, the clues I noticed. I finished and gave it to the lieutenant. He read it and nodded. "All right. Come to the precinct in a week to check on the progress." The police left. I remained alone in the ransacked apartment. I looked at the clock. 9 p.m. I needed to clean up, restore order, but I had no strength. I just sat on the floor, my back against the wall, closed my eyes, and thought about the medals, about the squad photo. I remembered my comrades' faces. Adam Cole, the sniper, killed by shrapnel in Aleppo. Marcus Lane, the sapper, blown up by a mine. Chris Gray, the assaulter, killed by a sniper. Ethan Wells, the machine gunner, burned alive in an APC after a grenade strike. Paul Soren, the scout, went missing in the mountains. Vic Carter, the radio man, died of wounds in a field hospital. Alex Rowe, the deputy commander, shot himself a year after returning from Syria. He couldn't handle the PTSD. 7 dead. I'm the only one alive. And the only thing I had left of them, the photograph, was stolen by some street punks. I opened my eyes. Inside, it was cold. Not rage anymore. Cold resolve. The police won't help. That means I have to act myself. Find the thieves, get the medals back, and punish those who dare to steal the memory of my fallen comrades. I stood up and went into the bedroom. In the corner under the bed was an old metal container, a military ammo box I brought back from Syria. It was secured with a heavy padlock. I hadn't opened it in 4 years. I swore to myself I never would, that life was behind me, but sometimes vows have to be broken. I took the key from my jacket pocket, I always wore it on a chain, and unlocked the box. The lid lifted with a heavy squeak. Inside was everything left of my military life. A combat scout knife, an 8-inch blade, double-edged with serrations, a black tactical vest with pouches for magazines, an old but working field radio, night vision binoculars, a thermal rifle scope, a compass, maps, a combat first aid kit, MREs, and at the very bottom, wrapped in an oiled cloth, was my modified M4 carbine. Shortened barrel, folding stock. A Picatinny rail for optics. The rifle I carried through all of Syria. I took out the rifle and unwrapped the cloth. The metal was cold, heavy, and familiar. My hands automatically gripped the handle and the foregrip. Muscle memory. I checked the mechanism. The bolt ran smoothly. The firing pin was intact, the trigger worked. The weapon was in perfect condition. Before leaving the military, I had stripped it down, cleaned it, lubricated it, and stored it. Now I just needed to load the magazines. I took 4 magazines and a box of 5.56mm NATO rounds from the container. The box was full, 200 rounds. I started loading the magazines. The movements were automatic. Thumb pushes the round in. Index finger feeds the next one. 30 rounds per magazine. 4 magazines, 120 rounds. More than enough. I loaded them, inserted 1 magazine into the rifle, and racked the bolt. Clack. A round was chambered. The weapon was ready. I set the safety and placed it on the bed. I took the thermal scope from the container and mounted it on the Picatinny rail. The scope powered on. The screen glowed green. The battery was low, but I had spares. I swapped the battery and checked it. Working. The thermal imager showed a clear picture. I put on the tactical vest and fastened the straps. The weight on my shoulders was familiar, comfortable. I attached the knife to my belt in its sheath. I placed the spare magazines in the pouches. The radio was clipped to my shoulder. Night vision binoculars around my neck. I looked at myself in the mirror. It was not the auto mechanic Shane Miller standing there. It was a Tier 1 assault officer, the soldier who commanded operations in Aleppo. A man trained to kill, quietly and quickly. I took off the vest, the gear, the weapon, and put everything back in the container. Too soon. First, I needed information. I had to find out who did this, where they are, and how to find them. I couldn't act blindly. The first rule in Special Forces: reconnaissance is everything. Without information, the operation is doomed to fail. I closed the container, pushed it under the bed, and looked at the clock. 9 p.m. I would start searching tomorrow morning. But first, I needed a plan. I cleaned up the apartment, put the furniture back in place, collected the scattered things, and washed the dishes. Working with my hands helped me think. The logic was simple. The thieves are local. Apartment burglaries happen regularly in my area. It's usually the same crew, junkies or petty criminals who live nearby. They know the area, know when people are at work, and know where it's easy to break in. So I needed to find this crew. How? The police are useless. I needed other sources of information. In every neighborhood, there are people who know everything about everyone. Janitors, corner store clerks, cab drivers, old women on benches. I needed to talk to them, ask questions carefully without arousing suspicion. I finished cleaning by 11 p.m. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I thought about what to do next. The plan gradually formed. Tomorrow morning, I'd start with the neighbors. I'd ask if anyone saw suspicious people near the building yesterday afternoon. Then I'd go to the nearest courtyards, talk to the locals, and find out who runs the burglaries in the area. I'd find them, get the medals back, and punish them. I woke up at 6 a.m. Not to an alarm, but by habit. Military discipline never leaves. 4 years as a civilian, but my body still wakes up at 6 on call. I got up, washed my face with cold water, shaved, and looked in the mirror. My face was drawn, dark circles under my eyes, but my gaze was steady. The decision was made. There was no going back. I called Frank and told him I was sick and wouldn't be in for a few days. He didn't ask questions, he just wished me well. A good man, he minds his own business. I dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark sweater, a jacket. Nothing military, nothing noticeable, just a normal guy from the neighborhood. I left the apartment at 7 a.m. The November morning in Port Arthur were cold and damp. The temperature was 41 Gitaga, with a light drizzle. The wind from the sea cut right through me. The streets were empty. Only a few people were rushing to work. I walked to the neighboring building. Mrs. Helen Davies, a woman in her 70s, lives on the first floor. She's always at the window, watching the courtyard, knowing everything about everyone. I knocked on her door. She opened it and looked at me suspiciously. "Shane, what's wrong?" I nodded. "Mrs. Davies, my apartment was robbed yesterday. I wanted to ask if you saw anyone suspicious near our entrance yesterday afternoon." She frowned. "Robbed? Oh dear. How awful. No, I was home all day, but I didn't see anything suspicious. Wait, though." She thought for a moment. "Yesterday, around 3 p.m., I saw 2 young men near your entrance. One was tall and skinny, wearing a hoodie. The other was shorter and stocky, in a black jacket. They were standing there smoking. I thought maybe they were waiting for someone. Then they went inside the building. About 20 minutes later, they came out and walked away quickly. The taller one was carrying a bag, a big, black garbage bag. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I felt something tighten inside me. That's them. 2 guys, a garbage bag full of stolen goods. Mrs. Davies, did you get a good look at their faces? Did you recognize anyone?" She shook her head. "No faces. They were too far away and they had their hoods up. But the shorter one, he was limping a little, dragging his right leg. I noticed that. A limp. That's a good clue. Thank you, Mrs. Davies. You helped a lot. If you remember anything else, please let me know." She nodded. "Of course, Shane. Did you file a police report?" "I did," I lied. "Good. I hope they catch those criminals. It's scary to sleep at night now." I left Mrs. Davies with my first lead. 2 young guys, one of them limping. I needed to find out more. I went to the next courtyard. Local teenagers always hang out near the playground there. It was too early now, of course, but they'd be there in the evening. I decided to come back tonight. For now, I needed to check other sources. I walked to the corner grocery store. Doris, the clerk, works there. She's a chatty woman in her 50s who knows everyone in the area. I went into the store. Doris was behind the counter, stocking shelves. She saw me and smiled. "Shane, good morning. You're early today. You usually come in the evening." I nodded. "Morning, Doris. I have a question. Have you heard anything about burglaries in our neighborhood lately?" She frowned. "Burglaries? What? Did someone get hit again?" "Yeah, my apartment was cleaned out yesterday." "Oh my God, Shane. What a nightmare. What did they take?" "Cash, documents, personal items." She shook her head. "That's the third case this month. The Petersons on the next street got hit 2 weeks ago. The Johnsons a week ago. They're getting brazen. No fear at all." I leaned closer. "Doris, who's doing this? Are there any rumors?" She glanced around, made sure no one else was in the store, and spoke softly. "They say it's local punks. Kids from the edge of town. Junkies. They rob apartments to get money for a fix. The police know who they are, but they don't do anything. They catch them once, and the next day they're back out. Influential parents or just bribing the cops. I don't know. Do you know names or where to find them?" She hesitated. "Shane, you're not planning to deal with them yourself, are you? It's dangerous. They're junkies. They could stab you." I shook my head. "No, I just want to know who they are. For the police. To give them a lead." She didn't look convinced, but she said, "Their leader is Danny Kincaid. They call him Crutch because he limps. He got hit by a car as a kid and damaged his leg. He's about 25. He lives somewhere on the outskirts, in those old barracks. 2 other guys are always with him. Trevor Hall, tall and scrawny, and Mikey Denton, stocky and dumb as a brick." Crutch limps. The description from Mrs. Davies was 100% correct. I memorized the names. "Doris, where are these barracks? Do you know the exact address?" She shrugged. "Not the exact one. Somewhere near the old factory. There are dilapidated shacks standing there. Homeless people and junkies live there. The cops don't even go there. It's a dangerous place." I nodded. "Understood. Thanks, Doris. You helped a lot." She grabbed my arm. "Shane, don't do anything stupid. These guys are dangerous. Let the police handle it." I nodded again. "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." I left the store. Now I had names and a rough location. Danny Crutch, Kincaid, Trevor Hall, Mikey Denton, and the old factory barracks. I needed to go there, scope out the area, see where they live, how they're protected, and how many of them there are. Only then could I plan the operation. I went back home, changed into warmer clothes, and took my binoculars, a notepad, and a pen. I left the rifle at home. Too soon. Recon first. I left the house, caught a bus, and rode to the area of the old canning factory on the edge of Port Arthur. The factory closed down in the 90s. The buildings are semi-ruined, windows smashed, the area overgrown with weeds. Behind the factory are old wooden barracks. They were built for workers a long time ago. Now, most are empty and falling apart, but some are still occupied. I got off the bus and walked to the barracks. It was a cloudy, grey November day, with drizzling rain. The streets were empty, no one around. Only a few stray dogs rummaging through trash cans. I reached the first barracks. A 2-story wooden building. The walls were rotten. The roof had collapsed in places. The windows were boarded up. Trash, empty bottles, and syringes littered the porch. A typical junkie den. I walked around the perimeter. On the backside, I saw a door slightly ajar. I heard voices and laughter from inside. I carefully crept closer, hid behind a pile of old boards, pulled out the binoculars, and focused on a second-floor window. The glass was broken. I could see inside. There were 3 young men in the room. One, tall and skinny, was sitting on a mattress, smoking. The second, stocky, stood by the window, looking out at the street. The third, medium height and limping, was pacing back and forth. Some items were laid out on the table. I focused the binoculars. The items were familiar: watches, a phone, a wallet, stolen goods from other apartments. I kept watching. The limping man walked up to the table and picked something up. I aimed the binoculars at his hands. My heart clenched. In his hands was my medal, the silver star. He turned it over, examining it, then laughed and showed the others. The tall one laughed too, saying something. I couldn't hear, but I could read his lips. How much will they give us for this? The limping man shrugged and tossed the medal back onto the table. My medal, the one I risked my life for in Syria, was lying on a dirty table among stolen phones and watches. A wave of cold fury rose inside me, but I held back. I couldn't act now. I needed a plan first. I put away the binoculars, backed away from the barracks, hid around the corner of a neighboring building, took out my notepad, and started writing. 3 people: Danny Crutch, limping; Trevor, tall and skinny; Mikey, stocky. Barrack number 7, 2nd floor, 3rd room on the left, entrance from the backside. Windows are broken. I can penetrate through them. I didn't see any weapons. Possibly knives, but no firearms. Minimal security. They feel safe, relaxed, thinking no one will find them. I sat in ambush for 2 hours, watching the barracks. During that time, several people went in and out. All young, disheveled, showing signs of drug addiction. Once, a car, an old beat-up sedan, pulled up. A man in his 40s got out, wearing a leather jacket and a gold chain. He went into the barracks and came out 10 minutes later, then drove away. A fence for stolen goods, most likely. He's the one they sell the loot to. That means the medals haven't been sold yet. Good. I have time to get them back. I left my observation point at noon. I needed to go home and prepare. Tonight, the operation would begin. The plan was simple: infiltrate the barracks, retrieve the medals, and punish the thieves. But I had to be careful. These guys are junkies. They might be armed and unpredictable. Never underestimate the enemy, even one this pathetic. I got home around 1 p.m., ate a quick lunch, beef stew with rice, tea. Simple, filling army food. Then I took the container from under the bed, opened it, and started preparing my gear. I left the rifle at home. Too noisy, too noticeable. This operation required a quiet weapon. I took my combat knife, checking the sharpness of the blade. Razor sharp. I put on the tactical vest. I secured the knife to my belt in its sheath. I placed plastic zip ties for restraints, duct tape for gagging, a flashlight, and spare batteries in the vest pockets. I put on a black balaclava and looked at myself in the mirror. A ghost. A shadow. That's what the fighters in Syria called us. Ghosts who come at night and disappear without a trace. I checked the plan again. Deploy at 11 p.m. Arrive at the barracks by midnight. By that time, the junkies would likely be asleep or passed out from a fix. Enter through the back door. Move silently into the room. If they're sleeping, I'll restrain all 3, grab the medals and leave. If they wake up, I'll neutralize them. The knife is for that. Quietly, quickly, professionally. No one must hear. No one must see. A ghost leaves no traces. I waited until evening. Time passed slowly. I sat on the couch, staring out the window. Outside, it grew dark. The rain intensified, turning into a downpour. The wind howled, bending the trees. Good weather for an operation. The rain would drown out sounds, and the wind would hide movement. Nature was on my side. At 9 p.m., I ate again. A light dinner. Bread, cheese, water. You shouldn't eat much before an operation. Your stomach should be half empty. In Special Forces, they taught us, a full soldier is a slow soldier. At 10 p.m., I put on all my gear, the vest, the knife. I rolled the balaclava up on my head like a cap, so I wouldn't attract attention yet. A dark jacket over the top, jeans, high boots. I looked like a normal guy, heading out. I left the house at 10:30 p.m. The rain lashed my face, icy cold drops. The streets were empty. The streetlights barely shone through the downpour. Perfect conditions. I walked towards the old factory district. The buses weren't running anymore. I didn't call a cab to avoid leaving traces. The walk took 40 minutes. I was soaked through but paid no attention. After Syria, after the heat and sandstorms, Russian rain was just water. I reached the barracks by midnight. The area was engulfed in darkness. Not a single street lamp. Only rare windows glowed with the faint light of candles or kerosene lamps. The electricity had been cut off in the barracks long ago. I walked around the perimeter of barrack number 7 and looked around. No one nearby. Everyone was huddled in their holes. I approached the back entrance. The door was closed, but the lock were old and rusty. I took a lockpick from my vest pocket and opened it in 30 seconds. The door opened silently. I stepped inside. The barracks were dark, damp, smelling of mold and urine. I turned on my flashlight, pointing the beam down to avoid drawing attention. The floor creaked under my feet. I walked carefully, placing my feet on the edges of the floorboards where they were least likely to bend, a skill I learned in reconnaissance. I reached the stairs and went up to the second floor. The corridor was long and narrow. Doors to rooms lined both sides. Most were closed or boarded up. I reached the third door on the left and listened. I heard voices inside, low and sluggish. Someone was talking. Someone was laughing. They were awake. I had to act fast and silently. I pulled the balaclava down over my face, checked the knife on my belt, and pushed the door open abruptly. The door flew open. 3 men were in the room. Exactly the ones I saw in the daytime. Danny Crutch Kincaid was sitting on the mattress, holding a syringe. He had just shot up a fix. His eyes were cloudy and unfocused. Trevor was lying on the floor, asleep or passed out. Mikey was standing by the window, smoking. He turned at the sound of the door, saw me. His eyes widened in terror. He opened his mouth to scream. I lunged forward, grabbed his throat with one hand, pinned him against the wall, and put the knife to his face with the other hand. "Quiet," I whispered coldly. "One sound, and I cut your throat." Mikey froze and nodded fearfully. His eyes darted around, looking for help, but there would be none. Danny on the mattress tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey. The drug was already working. His body was limp. He mumbled, "Who are you? What do you want?" I shoved Mikey to the floor, took a plastic zip tie from my pocket, and bound his hands behind his back quickly and professionally. Then I gagged him with duct tape. The whole process took 15 seconds. Mikey lay on the floor, bound and silent, his eyes full of fear. I walked up to Danny, grabbed him by the collar, and lifted him. He was light, maybe 130 pounds, tops. Junkies are always thin. I pinned him to the wall and held the knife to his throat. "Where are the medals?" I asked quietly, but every word sounded like a hammer blow. Danny blinked, trying to focus his gaze. "What medals?" he mumbled. I increased the pressure on the knife. The tip of the blade pricked his skin. A drop of blood appeared. The combat awards you stole yesterday on Marine Street. Where are they? Danny fearfully pointed a finger at the table in the corner of the room. There. On the table. Everything's there. I shoved him back onto the mattress and went to the table. On the table was a pile of stolen items. Phones, watches, wallets, documents. I started sifting through them. Under a heap of junk, I found my medals. All three. The Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Defense Department medal for the Syrian operation. I took them in my hand. The metal was cold and familiar. I put them in my jacket pocket and kept searching. I found the Tier 1 patch with the wolf emblem and put it in my pocket. I looked further. The squad photograph. Where is the photograph? I searched the entire table. Nothing. I turned to Danny. The photograph. Where is it? It was in the wooden case with the medals. Danny shook his head. I don't know what photo. We threw the case out. Wooden junk. Nobody needs it. We tossed it in the dumpster outside the building. The dumpster. That meant the photograph was lost. The only picture of my squad, the faces of my fallen comrades, tossed out like garbage. Something broke inside me. The cold fury turned into icy calculation. These people didn't just steal things, they stole memory, and they threw away what couldn't be replaced. There is no forgiveness for that. I walked over to Trevor, who was lying on the floor, and kicked him with my foot. No reaction. He was deeply passed out, possibly an overdose. I checked the pulse in his neck. Weak, but present. Alive. I didn't bother restraining him. He wouldn't wake up for at least 6 hours. I turned back to Danny. He was sitting on the mattress, pressed against the wall, his eyes darting around. Do you know who I am? I asked quietly. Danny shook his head. I'm the one you stole those medals from. I'm a Special Forces officer. I served in Syria. I earned those awards with my blood and the blood of my comrades, and you stole them to sell for a fix. Danny tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. His lips trembled. I continued. 7 of my friends died in that war. Their photograph was in that box you threw out like trash. Now, I'll never get it back. The only thing I had left of them, you threw in the dump. Danny whispered. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Too late, I replied. I took out a plastic zip tie, bound his hands behind his back, and gagged him with duct tape. He didn't resist. He sat there quietly, trembling. I looked around the room one last time. Stolen items on the table, a dirty mattress, syringes on the floor, the stench of drugs and rot. This was their den. This is where they hide after a burglary. This is where they divide the loot. This is where they shoot up. I needed to leave a message so they would understand there are things they will pay for. I took out my knife, walked over to the wall, and carved words into the wooden paneling. You stole the past. The past came for you. The letters were deep and clear, the message unmistakable. Then I turned to Danny. He was looking at me with terrified eyes. I crouched down next to him, looked him in the eyes. Listen to me carefully. I'm taking my medals and leaving. But if you or your little friends ever steal anything from anyone again, if you harm someone weak, old, or defenseless, I will come back. And next time there will be no talking. Just the knife and the darkness. Understood? Danny nodded frantically. I stood up and went to Mikey. I crouched next to him. Did you hear that too? No more stealing, no more harming the weak, or I will return. Mikey nodded desperately, his eyes full of tears. I stood up and walked around the room one last time. I took my documents from the table, my passport, discharge papers, and driver's license. I found the cash too. The $7,500 was stuffed into a dirty sock under the mattress. I took it. It was mine. I looked at the three bound men. Pathetic creatures. Junkies living day to day, stealing to buy a fix, not thinking about consequences. Before, I might have felt pity for them, but not now. They stole the memory of my fallen comrades. There is no forgiveness for that. I walked out of the room quietly, closed the door, went down the stairs, and exited through the back door. The rain was still pouring. I stood under the downpour for a few seconds, letting the water wash away the tension. The operation was successful. The objective was achieved. The medals were returned, the thieves were punished, and the message was delivered. But there was no satisfaction inside. The photograph was lost forever. The faces of my comrades remained only in my memory, and memory fades and distorts over time. I took off the balaclava, hid it in my pocket, and walked quickly away from the barracks. I had to leave before anyone noticed. After half an hour, I reached a busy street and hailed a late-night cab. The driver looked at my wet clothes but didn't ask questions. I paid him. The rest was not his business. I got home around 2 a.m., went into the apartment, locked all the deadbolts, took off my wet clothes, my vest, and my gear. I put the medals on the table and looked at them for a long time. The metal was cold and familiar. Each medal was a story of battle, blood, and brotherhood. I remembered the day in Aleppo I received the Silver Star. Our squad was assaulting a building held by fighters. A sniper on the roof was shooting down my men. I climbed up alone, under fire, through the ruined staircase. I reached the roof, neutralized the sniper, and saved 3 wounded soldiers. My commanding officer nominated me for the award. I remembered the Bronze Star for valor. An operation to free hostages in an Aleppo suburb. The fighters were holding a family, mother, father, 3 children. We infiltrated at night, silently neutralized the guards, and led the hostages out. No one was hurt. Clean work. I remembered the Defense Department Medal for Service in Syria. Everyone who served there received it. But for me, it meant more. It was a memory of 2 years in hell, of my comrades, of the war that changed me forever. I picked up the medals, took them into the bedroom, and hung them back on the wall, in their former place. But the wooden case was gone. The photograph was gone. I just screwed the medals directly into the wall on the nail mounts. It looked simple, rough, but military. That's how it should be. I went to bed at 4 a.m. For the first time in 3 days, I slept soundly, without nightmares, without sweat. I just fell into a deep sleep. I woke up at 10 a.m. to the phone ringing. I picked up. It was Frank. "Shane, how are you feeling? Recovering?" I replied, "Yeah, Frank, much better. I'll be in tomorrow." "Good, good. We just got a new truck in. Needs a transmission replacement. Just the job for you. Get some rest." I hung up, got out of bed, and looked at the medals on the wall. They were back where they belonged. The case was closed. I could return to my normal life, to work, to the routine, to trying to forget the past. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. I got the medals back, and I punished the thieves. But the photograph was lost, and that wouldn't give me peace. I went out onto the balcony, lit a cigarette, and stood there, looking at the gray sky, the rain, and the city below. I wondered what to do next. The next 2 days passed peacefully. I went back to work at the shop, replacing the transmission on the big rig, fixing engines, welding cracked frames. Just the usual routine. Frank didn't ask questions. He only said once, "Shane, you seem different. Something happen?" I replied, "Everything's fine, Frank. Just tired. He nodded and didn't press. A good man, he knows when to back off. But I had no peace. Every night, I thought about the photograph. The only image of my squad, the faces of my fallen comrades, was thrown into a dumpster. Trash collectors come every day. That meant the photograph was long gone, under tons of garbage in the landfill. Impossible to find. Lost forever. The thought burned inside me. I tried to recall the faces of my comrades, to restore every detail in my memory. Adam Cole. Tall, fair hair, blue eyes, a scar on his left cheek. Marcus Lane. Short, stocky, always smiling. Chris Gray. Lean, dark hair, brown eyes. But the more time passed, the more blurred the details became. Memory is imperfect. Faces warp and are forgotten. I needed the photograph to preserve them forever. On the third day after retrieving the medals, something happened that changed everything. I was working at the shop around 3 p.m., changing the oil on an old utility truck. Suddenly, a man I didn't know walked into the shop. About 40, medium height, stout build, short haircut, expensive leather jacket, gold chain around his neck. It was the same guy I saw near the barracks 3 days ago, the fence for stolen goods. He looked around the shop, saw me under the truck, walked over, and tapped his boot on the floor. "Hey man, you Miller?" I crawled out from under the truck and wiped my hands with a rag. "I'm Miller. What do you need?" He looked me over. "The name's Gabe. Need to talk. Alone." I nodded to Frank and went outside with Gabe. We walked around the corner of the building where no one could see us. Gabe pulled out a cigarette and lit it, offering me one. I refused. He took a drag and exhaled the smoke. "I heard you paid a visit to my guys a few days ago. Crutch, Trevor, Mikey. Tied them up, took your stuff, left a message on the wall." I stared at him silently, sizing him up. Was he dangerous? Armed? His hands were in his pockets, maybe a knife or a pistol. He was built thick, but not athletic. More fat than muscle. Not a fighter. Just an average street thug. Gabe continued. "The boys told me. Said some guy in a balaclava showed up with a knife, a pro. Tied them up in a minute. Took the medals, the documents, the cash. They're still freaked out. Crutch is even afraid to shoot up. He thinks you'll come back." He smirked. "I checked who you are. Turns out, a mechanic from Marine Street, but not just any mechanic. You got a military past, special forces, Syria. That explains a lot." I crossed my arms over my chest. "What are you getting at, Gabe?" He threw the butt onto the ground and stomped it out with his boot. "I'm getting at the fact that I need a man with your skills. I have a business. I buy and sell stolen goods. But competitors are getting bold. They're threatening me, demanding a cut. I need protection. A man who knows how to handle a weapon, who knows how to fight, who knows how to solve problems quietly and professionally. You're a perfect fit." I shook my head. "Not interested. I'm a mechanic. The past is behind me." Gabe grinned. "The past is never behind you. You proved that yourself 3 days ago. You went back to what you know. Tracking, attacking, punishing. That's your nature, soldier. You can pretend to be a civilian, but inside, you're a fighter, and a fighter needs a war, or he slowly goes crazy." His words hit a nerve because they were true. I had been pretending for 4 years, working as a mechanic, living quietly, trying to forget. But inside, there was always a void, a feeling that I was in the wrong place, that my real life was back there, in Syria, in the ruins of Aleppo, amidst the fighting and the camaraderie. Gabe continued. "I pay well. $8,000 a month just to have you around, plus bonuses for solving problems. You could rent a decent place, Buy a car, live well, not busting your ass in a dirty shop for peanuts. I looked at him coldly. I'm not for sale, Gabe. Find someone else. I turned and started walking back to the shop. Gabe called out, Miller, wait. I stopped without turning around. He walked closer and said quietly, I know you're looking for the photograph. Crutch told me you threw out the wooden case with the photo inside. You want it back, right? I turned around abruptly. What do you know about the photograph? Gabe smiled, satisfied. I know where it is. After Crutch told me about your visit, I drove to that house on Marine Street and checked the dumpsters. I found the wooden case, broken, in one of the containers. Inside was the photograph. 8 men in camouflage. Syria. I took it. Thought it might come in handy. My heart started beating faster. The photograph existed, not lost. Gabe pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket and unfolded it. It was the photo. A little creased and dirty, but whole. 8 men in front of the ruined building in Aleppo. Me and 7 fallen comrades. The last proof that they existed, that we were a squad, brothers in arms. I took a step forward. Give it to me. Gabe hid the photo back in his pocket. I will, but not for free. You do one job for me. One job. Then the photo is yours. And we're even. I'll never call on you again. I clenched my fists. Rage was rising inside. I wanted to grab him by the throat, rip the photo away, but that would be stupid. We were on a busy street, near the shop, with witnesses. Besides, Gabe wasn't an idiot. He surely had a copy of the photo somewhere safe. If anything happened to him, the copy would be destroyed. I had to play smarter. What job? I asked coldly. Gabe smiled, pleased. See, we can make a deal. The job's simple. I have a competitor named Armen Torossian. Armenian. He owns several fencing operations in town. He recently started getting bold, demanding I give him half my locations, or he threatens to kill me. Yesterday, his guys beat up my driver and broke his arm. The message is clear. Share or war. I need you to teach Armen a lesson. Not kill him. Just scare him. Show him that I have teeth too, so he backs off and leaves me alone. I looked at Gabe silently. Gang warfare, the criminal world, something I never wanted to get involved in. But the photograph, the faces of my comrades, a memory I couldn't lose. If I agree, you give me the photograph immediately after the job? Gabe nodded. My word. One job, the photo's yours. And we're square. I thought for a few seconds, weighing the risks. On one hand, getting involved in criminal affairs is dangerous. I could end up under investigation, targeted by rivals, or in the line of fire. On the other hand, the photograph, the only image of my fallen comrades. Without it, the memory would eventually fade, the faces forgotten. They would disappear forever. All right, I said. One job, but on my terms. I kill no one. Just scare him. And after that, we never cross paths again, Gabe. Gabe extended his hand. Deal. We shook hands. His palm was clammy and soft, the hand of a man who doesn't do physical labor. The hand of a gangster. When do we start? I asked. Tonight. Armen spends every evening at his restaurant on the waterfront. It's called Ararat. He's usually there with his security and friends until midnight. But after midnight, he walks to his car in the parking lot alone. That's when you act. Approach him, scare him, and leave a message. He needs to understand he messed with the wrong person. I nodded. I need information. What does he look like? How much security? What kind of car? Where's the parking lot? Gabe took out his phone and showed me a photo. On the screen was a man in his 50s, stocky, bald, with a thick, dark mustache. Typical Armenian look. That's Armen. Security. He has 2 bodyguards. Both big guys, former wrestlers. But after midnight, they stay at the restaurant, and Armen walks to the parking lot, about 200 yards away, alone. His car is a black Mercedes, parked in a secured lot behind the restaurant. I memorized the information. All right, I'll do it tonight. Where do we meet after? Gabe gave me the address. The old pier, dock number 5, I'll be waiting there at 2 a.m. You bring confirmation the job is done, and you get the photograph. I returned to the shop and worked until evening. Frank noticed I was preoccupied and asked, "Everything all right, Shane?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." He patted my shoulder. "Rest up. You're a good worker. Don't want you wrecking your health." I thanked him. I left at 6 p.m. At home, I ate quickly, then started preparing. I took out the container, put on the tactical vest, secured the knife to my belt, and put on a dark jacket over it. The balaclava went into my pocket. I decided not to take a firearm. The goal was to scare, not to kill. The knife was enough. I left the house at 9 p.m., took the bus, and rode to the waterfront. The Ararat restaurant was in the tourist district of the city. A beautiful building with a view of the water. I walked past it, checking the area. The entrance was guarded by 2 large men in black suits. Through the windows, I could see tables, patrons, and waiters inside. A typical expensive restaurant for the wealthy. I circled the building and found the parking lot in the back, a secured area, a fence, a gate, and a guard in a booth. Expensive cars were parked there. Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses. Armen's black Mercedes was in the far corner. I memorized the license plate. I moved away from the parking lot and found a place for an ambush. An old, abandoned warehouse across from the parking lot. I climbed onto the roof using the fire escape. I lay down on my stomach and watched. From here, I could see the entire parking lot, the restaurant exit, and the gate. Perfect position. I waited for 3 hours. The cold bit into my bones, but I didn't move. Military endurance. In special forces, we were trained to lie in ambush for 20 hours without moving. 3 hours was nothing. At 12:30 a.m., Armen Torossian came out of the restaurant. Stocky, bald, wearing an expensive suit and gold rings on his fingers. He walked confidently, not looking back. His bodyguard stayed at the restaurant entrance. Armen walked toward the parking lot alone. I slid off the roof, quickly skirted the warehouse, and emerged onto the road ahead of Armen. I pulled the balaclava over my face and hid around the corner of a building. Armen was walking slowly, smoking a cigar, humming something to himself. Relaxed, suspecting nothing. A mistake. You always have to be vigilant. When he reached the corner, I stepped out of the shadows, grabbed him from behind, and pinned him against the wall. I clamped one hand over his mouth and put the knife to his throat with the other. Armen froze. His eyes were wide with terror. "Quiet," I whispered coldly. "One sound, and I cut your throat." He nodded frantically. The cigar fell from his hands and rolled across the asphalt. I loosened my grip slightly so he could breathe, but I kept the knife at his throat. "Are you Armen Torossian?" I whispered. He nodded again. "You're threatening Gabe, demanding his locations. You beat up his driver." Armen tried to say something, but I pressed the knife harder. A drop of blood appeared on his neck. "Be silent. Listen carefully. Gabe now has professional protection. If you or your men touch him again, I will come for you. I will find you anywhere, in the restaurant, at your home, in your car. And next time, there will be no talking. Just the knife and the darkness. Understood? Armin nodded desperately. Sweat ran down his bald head. The smell of fear mixed with expensive cologne. I continued. You will leave Gabe alone. You will forget about his locations. You will forget your demands. If I find out in a week that you've started acting up again, I will return. And it will be the last thing you see in your life. Clear? Armin nodded again. I removed the knife from his throat, but held his neck tightly. Turn around. Armin turned to face me. Even through the balaclava, he couldn't see my face, only my eyes. I looked into his eyes, coldly, for a long time. I wanted him to remember that gaze. The gaze of a soldier who has killed, who won't stop if he has to. Armin stared into my eyes and understood. These were not empty threats. It was a promise. Go, I said, shoving him. Armin stumbled backward, fell onto the asphalt, quickly got up, and ran toward his car, looking over his shoulder. He started the engine on the third try. His hands were shaking. He sped out of the parking lot, nearly taking out the gate arm. He vanished into the night. I remained standing in the shadows, watching. The security guards at the restaurant hadn't noticed anything. Too far away, too dark. I took off the balaclava, hid it in my pocket, and walked away. The job was done. Armin was scared. Gabe would get what he wanted. Now it was my turn to get what was promised. I reached the old pier 20 minutes later. Dock number 5 was abandoned. Dilapidated wooden decking. Old rusty containers. The stench of rotten fish and seaweed. Gabe was standing next to a black sedan, smoking. He saw me, threw the butt down, and walked over. Done? He asked. I nodded. Armin won't bother you anymore. Scared like a kid. Gabe smirked. Good. Very good. You're a pro, Miller. Too bad you don't want to work full time. I held out my hand. The photograph. Gabe took the folded paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it and checked. My photograph. Whole and undamaged. 8 men in front of Aleppo. I carefully folded it and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. We're square, I said. Gabe nodded. Square, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. I turned and walked away. Gabe called out, Miller! I stopped without turning around. You're a good soldier, but a soldier needs a war. Sooner or later, you'll figure that out. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, melting into the night. His words stung because they were true. A soldier needs a war. Without one, he feels lost, useless. For the past 4 years, I tried to live without war. I worked as a mechanic, pretending to be an ordinary person. But it was a lie. Inside, I always remained a soldier. And these last few days, going back to what I knew, tracking, planning, acting, I felt alive. Genuinely alive. For the first time in 4 years, I got home at 2 a.m., locked the door, put away my gear, took out the photograph, and stared at it for a long time. The faces of my comrades looked back at me from the picture. Young, tired, but alive. Back then, in Aleppo, we didn't know 7 of us would die. We believed we would all return. But war doesn't ask what you believe. War takes the best. I hung the photograph on the wall next to the medals. Now everything was back in place. The memory was preserved. My comrades were not forgotten. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Gabe's words, thinking about who I really was. A mechanic or a soldier? A civilian or a fighter? 4 years I'd tried to answer that question. 4 years I'd lied to myself that I could be a normal person. But the last few days proved otherwise. The moment a threat arose, I instantly reverted to my old skills. Planning, Action, cold calculation, controlled rage, professional execution. It was in me forever. It was my nature. You can take off the uniform, but you can't take off what's inside. I finally fell asleep toward morning, only to be awakened at 7 a.m. by a knock on the door. I opened it. Major Pierce was standing on the threshold. "Miller, may I come in?" I nodded and let him in. He sat down at the table and looked at me seriously. "I heard about last night. The Ararat restaurant. Scaring Armin. You broke into a criminal kingpin's operation and terrified him clean. It was clean, professional, and drew attention to you. People are talking about a veteran who lives quietly but defends the weak, a ghost who comes at night and punishes the guilty." He took out a folder of documents and placed it on the table. "I have a proposal. Unofficial service, flexible schedule. You handle cases that the police can't or won't solve. Hostage rescues, missing persons, witness protection. The government pays a modest but decent salary. You remain a mechanic for cover, but when needed, you become what you are. A soldier." I looked at the folder for a long time. This was it. The final choice between two lives. Mechanic or soldier. Quiet routine or dangerous missions. Safety or purpose. But there was no choice really. The last few weeks had proven it. I couldn't live a normal life. The war was inside me. It was part of me. The only question was what to fight for. The state or the people. Orders or justice. I picked up the folder and opened it. Inside were several cases. A missing teenager, a kidnapped woman, a threatened witness, people who needed help. "I agree," I said, "but on my terms. I choose the cases myself. I work alone or with those I trust. No orders, only requests." Major Pierce extended his hand. "Deal. Welcome back, Miller. The country needs men like you." We shook hands. He left, leaving the folder behind. I sat at the table and flipped through the cases. Each story was someone's pain, someone's cry for help. I could help. I had the skills, the experience, the resolve. For 4 years, I'd been hiding from the past. Now, the past was my future. I wasn't running anymore. I was embracing who I was. A soldier, a protector, a ghost who comes at night and restores justice. I stood up and went to the window. Outside, the dawn painted the sky pink. A new day, a new life, a new war. But this time, I knew what I was fighting for. For those who couldn't defend themselves. For the children, the elderly, the weak. For justice in a world that has too little of it. I looked at the medals on the wall, at the photograph of my fallen comrades. "Adam, Marcus, Chris," I whispered. "I will continue what we started. I will protect the innocent. Just as you taught me. Just as we swore." I turned away from the window and started gathering my gear. A new mission was waiting.